Good afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for coming to the session. This session today features Vice President of Programming, Productions, and Operations at DraftKings Network. This is Len Mead. And the host of You Better You Bet at BetMGM Network and Audacy production, Nick Kostos. Give them a warm welcome, please.
Yeah.
So
I actually think that you guys we flew out here to be here. You could clap a little louder for us. I mean, come on, right? Thank you very much.
So the title of this session, guys, is Wagering and Viewership, Capitalizing on the Betting Boom in Sports. And I think the way to set it up before we dive into some of the questions is just to paint a picture of the sports betting space. The American sports betting industry posted a record $13.71 billion in 2024 revenue. That was up from 2023's record of $11.04 billion, according to the American Gaming Association's annual report. Since 2018, nearly $500 billion in bets have been placed at legal sports books since the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act was repealed in 2018. So we're talking about major money here, right? And so these guys see it from very different parts of the media ecosystem, if you will. And I thought the place I want to start, there's different ways to do this. You have hardcore betting information and analysis, and then you have what you call wagertainment. So why don't you explain that first? What is the difference with wagertainment versus the hardcore information?
So information is a piece of wagertainment. Wagertainment is the pie. Information is a piece of that pie. I think when you do sports betting content, if you are veering too far into entertainment, okay, that's great. It's also just sports talk radio or good sports content you'd watch on television. It has to have the information also. Now also, if it's just too information based, but it's very dry, then you're doing Bloomberg News and it's just financial information, which honestly, that might not be a bad career pivot at this point in time. But, wagertainment is the combination of both of those things. So you want to combine smart betting talk, but you also want to make it entertaining and accessible to everybody. So that's kind of the MO of our network, kind of the bedrock of my philosophy behind my on-air stuff. Combining information with entertainment, you get wagertainment.
In your case, Len, DraftKings kind of has a little bit of the wagertainment, but you've also seen it from the other side because you were the general manager of VEASAN at one point as well. So very different styles in how they approach reaching the sports betting consumer. What is wagertainment and how you view the content spot?
Yeah, it certainly depends on what you're after, right? When you're making content in the betting space, there are a lot of different groups within that audience that you can be pursuing. So when we were working with VEASAN, that is a hardcore betting audience. That, if anything, we were very careful not to err towards entertainment. Now that we obviously want to be entertaining, but at its core, there could be no sacrificing of sort of like the quality of information because that audience they were looking for insights to help them make wagers. At DraftKings Network, if anything, we probably err pretty far in the opposite direction towards entertainment. And as I see the ecosystem, I think where Nick and BetMGM, they are probably in the middle somewhere, right? Where you're not just entertainment, you're not just sports talk, but you are very interested in making sure there's a lot of entertainment to it. DraftKings Network, being entertaining is in most ways the most important thing. We're trying to grow audience. We're trying to create affinity with DraftKings, and we use a pretty light touch when it comes to where sort of the sports betting works its way into the talk.
Talking about audience, who is the target audience? Like when you look at DraftKings Sports Network, who are you trying to reach?
So we talk about fans who are in on the action is who we are trying to reach. And at the end of the day, like we want a pretty wide pie. I mean, if we want to talk demographics, nobody's going to be shocked to hear that, you're dealing with primarily men, 21 to 54 is probably, the sweet spot. But we, ultimately we swim in a couple of different pools. We certainly want people that are familiar with DraftKings, want to transact with DraftKings. Maybe we can get them more familiar with products and offerings and things like that. But ultimately, we want audience size. And so we need to make sure we are entertaining. And again, if you were to spend an hour watching DraftKings Network, with most of the programming that we do, I think you would see a pretty light touch about how DraftKingsy it is. The primary goal is to be entertaining and keep an audience engaged. And then there are sort of subtle, smaller ways to work in the bet.
As a host, Nick, when you visualize doing You Better You Bet and who you're trying to reach, who's in your head of who you're trying to connect with?
Everybody. 100% of sports fans. All of them. I think as You Better You Bet has evolved and the show started in 2019, it's been a goal of mine. I'd like for You Better You Bet and sports betting content to become even more mainstream than it is now. The best compliment that I get paid, and I actually talked about this, Jason's got a great website. You guys interviewed me and I did, and I talked about this in the interview, that, the best compliment that I can receive is when someone who doesn't bet loves the content of the show. So if you're a sports fan, I want you to be able to find value in our content. If you're an experienced bettor, I want you to be able to find value in the content. If you just started betting, I want you to be able to find value in the content. The show is a love letter to sports and sports betting. So if you're a sports fan, that is the target audience.
Let's talk about the content. You know, you've got a lot of different things that obviously in the world of just general sports, everybody talks about lead with the NFL. But when you're in the betting world, sometimes that's not necessarily like today. You could talk about NFL, but you've got a national championship game coming up, which is probably going to take precedence. How do you decide on what is most important to lead with versus what's secondary and almost the third topic?
You know, I think the sports calendar really dictates that. Like during football season, like it's going to be football 99.9% of the time. But in March, we're leading with the NCAA tournament a lot now on a day when the Giants signed Russell Wilson, and that was on a Friday night, I believe. On Monday, we're doing that very early in the show. Because while obviously there's a ton going on in college basketball, we can't ignore a quarterback signing with the team to be their starter in the New York market. So, you know, I think that it really depends on what time of year we're at, right? So we are now entering a time in the sports calendar. April is a great month because we have the NFL draft. The Masters is next week. The national championship game is tomorrow. And the playoffs in both the NBA and the National Hockey League start 2 weeks from yesterday. So we're going to have no shortage of topics with which to choose from. And it's my job as a talk show host with a 3-hour show and an hour streamed on NBC Sports Now and Peacock. We have to hit all of those things to serve every single member of the audience. And then it's just a matter every morning of slotting it into where we feel like it makes the most sense.
So do you, having a national show, do you ever think about who that, you know, where you're getting the most audience from? So for example, I remember having this chat with Jim Rome, and when he started his show, he was on in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Denver, Colorado. And he told me there's no bigger Colorado and New Mexico fan than Jim Rome.
Yeah.
Because that's where he was being cleared. Once he started picking up other markets, he evolved his content. How do you, because obviously when you're going on Audacy stations and they're in a lot of key markets, if you know you're on in New York, you're probably going to talk a little more in New York. How does that play into your strategy of who you're trying to reach?
Yeah, I think really it's national is a lot different, right? So, you know, when we were on doing a national playoff show, Sunday morning wildcard weekend, so leading into Broncos Bills, Mike Vrabel has announced that he's going to be the next head coach of the New England Patriots. I know that we're on in Boston, so I have to stop down almost, and I have to make sure that we do 5 to 7 awesome minutes on this to serve that audience there, because people that are listening on WEEI in Boston, like, yeah, like Broncos Bills is great. The games are great. Also, my team just hired a new head coach. I'd love to hear the sports radio station break this down. So I think that's a good way to think about it. And honestly, on a national show, especially since we're trying to take this mainstream, you have to play the hits. So the New York Giants happen to be my favorite team and Jason's team, but they're a national team. They sign Russell Wilson or Jameis Winston. We are doing it on the show because they're a huge market.
I want to get your perspective because you've seen it 2 different ways. I remember on VSiN, there could be days I would hear soccer segments leading an hour or NHL leading an hour because hockey was big in certain markets. How do you guys, DraftKings is different obviously than VSiN, but when it comes to content mix of what you want to hear on your programs, how do you guys decide?
Yeah, again, it's a very different mentality. I will say that when you're a national service, whether VSiN or DraftKings Network or many others, like, you're generally not thinking regionally. Like, I think that, like, there's a very radio mentality to that, I think, where literally you're thinking about that station you just added and we want to make sure we give them some love. At VSiN, we did a little bit of that because we were very much in the radio space, and we would occasionally be picking up or lobbying a new station and want to make sure that they felt recognized. When you're hardcore betting like a VSiN is, part of what's kind of so fun about the space is, if you're somebody that bets either for a living or bets seriously, you can make $1 on soccer just like you can make $1 on the Super Bowl or on ping pong or on a tennis tournament in Malaysia. And so if there's
COVID was a fun time for all of that.
Table tennis never had it so good. And when
getting up at 2 a.m. to bet the KBO,
when we have experts that can give you an edge, you want that edge no matter what the sport is in. Again, at a DraftKings network, it's much more of a general audience. You're not trying to go down those rabbit holes so much. And so naturally, just the sports calendar dictates where the interest is. I think the one place where, and any smart company would do this, there are certainly sports that are important to DraftKings, and you certainly make sure that you don't miss them, right? Of course, everybody is going to talk a lot of NFL. The NBA is a pretty major priority for DraftKings. And we think about that as we evaluate our shows and our talent and sort of where do we maybe want to lean in and make sure that we're talking to that audience.
One of my favorite things to talk about with executives is we could talk about content all day. How do you know it works? Like, everybody tells me, we got to be in everything and we got to talk about this. Great. How do you evaluate if it's successful or not? Because being in the space is one thing, but whether or not you led with the right topic, whether it got somebody to bet, that's a different game. So how do you make that determination?
Yeah, I don't think it's a super complicated answer. At the end of the day, audience size is, if you can make that metric work, every tributary can flow off of that river. At the end of the day, you can be making incredible high quality stuff, best in class. And if your audience is tiny, it's just like, you're not in this to win awards. You're in this to do business.
Mm-hmm.
So you're always measuring your audience size. This is, again, there's probably 30 companies out here on the floor that could give you new and exciting ways to measure your audience. And we work with a number of them. As a result, you end up on all platforms too. It's sort of the classic, you need to be where your audience is. So you have to, in our case, again, we have a fast channel with DraftKings Network that is 24/7 video, but we also do an enormous amount of podcasting. We have a very successful YouTube page that we've put a lot of focus on. We have social content that we put a lot of focus on. So ultimately, you can add all those numbers up and see what's working and what's not. I think the other maybe more subtle thing that a DraftKings can do is there is, brand affinity that you're looking for ultimately. At the end of the day, the reason a company like a DraftKings is in this space is you're trying to create a positive correlation and association between, I like that show and it's a DraftKings show. And, we're getting to a place where, again, when somebody wants to make a bet, they are having more and more options, right? Of what site they could go to, what app they want to use. And Mind is a way to win that battle where, like, I remember I heard that thing on DraftKings. Now, okay, yeah, maybe I'll go to the DraftKings site. I'll do this thing.
For you, Nick, same question, because if your live streams are good, but your YouTube video views are down or your X clips are not high, some could say, well, we're not hitting the right metric, or you are hitting the right metric. How do you determine whether or not You Bet or You Bet is doing its part to hit what you're after?
Well, I'm not in the weeds on this as someone who talks like the way Len is. I would say once a month or once every 6 weeks, I pick up the phone. I call our mutual buddy, Mitch Rosen, or Andrew Williams, our brand manager, and I say, how's our audience? And they usually say it's up, which is really great. And hopefully that continues. Is it up from last month? Is it up from where it was 1 year ago? And if the answer is yes, that's kind of all I need to hear. Is our overall audience up? And if the answer is yes, then great. And if not, then I am in full on crisis mode.
when it comes to content, how has your approach changed over the last 5 years? Because you mentioned that the show started in 2019. Here we are 6 years later. What are you doing different today doing the show that you do versus when you started?
I think my approach isn't necessarily that different. I think the philosophy behind how we do the show has evolved a little bit. The first couple years of the show, our guests are primarily bettors, right? They're people that bet. They're not necessarily huge broadcast names. And that's fine. You can win doing that. But I want the show to be ubiquitous. I want the show to go mainstream. I want people that don't bet to be able to listen to You Better You Bet and have the same enjoyment that an experienced bettor would have. So one thing that I think we have made a huge priority, we brought over Bill Zimmerman as our executive producer, was Mad Dog Russo's executive producer for a decade. I worked with him at Sirius, was getting A-level guests on. We have the best of the best guests on You Better You Bet. I think not a mistake that some betting content makes, because I think you can win in a bunch of different ways. I think, to use a restaurant analogy, people, like when you do a betting show, they're trying to do like Le Bernardin, great restaurant in Manhattan, 3 Michelin stars, right? And this is not an apples to apples analogy. It's not. But I almost think you need to be a little more McDonald's than Le Bernardin. You need to attract as wide an audience as possible. So while the show was a massive critical success and a success the first couple years, my goal now is I want to keep having it be a critical success, keep having the bettors be very happy, but now I'm trying to reach everybody. That's the big difference now.
I want to get your take on that too, because all three of us worked in traditional media. And then this becomes a big deal. We all have to learn it, right? So how are you doing things different today versus when you first started stepping into this space?
Yeah, I mean, like anything else, the data informs where you go, right? And so we get data, DraftKings at its core is an unbelievable data company. So you have these tremendous resources that, to your point, you may be hearing every 4 weeks, 6 weeks, like up, down, how we doing. We have unbelievably detailed.
God bless you, man.
Are getting on a daily basis that tells you where your audience is coming from and up or down and what demographics and which platforms and how much do they cross each other. And, there's a few sort of obvious truths that start to come out of it. I will say one of the big learnings that we have had over the years in this is not a big shocker, but like big names penetrate, like when you are launching programs, if you have name talent that have recognition, that will always pop more than a really great show, but that you're sort of starting at zero and trying to build. In traditional media, Jason, I think there's a lot of that. There's a lot of let's build something and slowly, like work our way up. That's, the waters have gotten very crowded in sports betting content. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's a reflection that, right, there's a lot of business to be had in this, but that is a tough battle to start at zero and try to build and build and build. And so we generally have leaned towards jumpstarting and trying to find name talent that you can go with. You're going to start here and then you try to build it from there.
Speaking of building, obviously getting the most people into the funnel is the goal. But to do that, you got to get them aware of the product. So starting with you, Nick, how do you guys go about growing awareness of You Better You Bet, the BetMGM network? Obviously, you have the ability to go on a lot of Audacy sports stations. That definitely helps. But what are some other things you guys do to try to get more people aware of the product?
I'm going to give you a terrible answer here. I suck at social media. My daughter's 11 months old today. My hope is that social media goes away as she gets older. Probably a losing bet. I kind of only concern myself with, look, when I go on the various shows that I go on, obviously I want to be as great as possible, but that's what I do anyway. That's what I do when I'm on You Better You Bet from 4 to 7 on weekdays and everything else that I do. I don't really do a lot with that unless I'm told to do it. My focus is on the content and everything else is up to everything else. So bad answer, but
Mitch, Rose, and Andrew, make sure I get some marketing.
Hey guys, do your job so I can do mine better, please. Yeah.
So DraftKings has been one of the key advertisers in all of media, so that definitely doesn't hurt you, Len.
Yeah, but it's tricky though. Again, DraftKings is a big complex company, right? And so, I don't want to say that, the right arm doesn't always know what the left arm is doing, but just because one wing of DraftKings is doing one thing, it does not mean that every other department gets swept up in that every time they do it.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a new battle. Anybody that's worked in media for any prolonged amount of time, especially programming, there's no failed show on earth that wouldn't have worked if only it had gotten better promotion, right? Like every show that ultimately went away, if only we had had more promotion, we would have been a big hit. And the reality, of course, is you cannot promote everything at equal levels. And if you try to promote too many different things, then it's all just wallpaper, like none of it matters. So the trick here is always sort of off-channel versus on-channel promotion. There's not a lot of spending on off-channel promotion. It's expensive. And again, there are plenty of them around here. Every platform that carries your services will happily take your check if you want to write them a check to amplify and elevate your channel and your content. And we have done some experimentation there. And again, like any good database company would, you find out what you spent, you see what kind of an audience lift you got, you decide, do we want to do this again? Was it worth it or not? And then you allocate appropriately. The better tools to leverage are the on-channel tools.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where, again, a DraftKings is very different than a ESPN or an Audacy. DraftKings has different audience information and audiences that they can reach out to. There are millions of customers who are using DraftKings app on a daily basis. They get newsletters, they get alerts sometimes, and there are a lot of different ways that, done strategically, you can find ways to reach out to them. And again, frankly, as we would do with off-channel spending, you track it, you test it, you see, okay, when we do it this way, it works. When we do it that way, it didn't really felt like that was not a lot of juice for the squeeze. And so I will give you an example of something that we've done that has worked really well. So we started doing a thing called, the DraftKings Network Play Call. And so this is a case where we will introduce, the ability to give away a free bet, or, some sort of site credit or something like that. But we will now do it during a specialized window and link it to programming that is running on DraftKings, and on DraftKings Network. Now that could be the website. It could be the FAST channel. It could even be a podcast. But because we're getting left arm and right arm together, that sort of gives the permission structure where, okay, let's light up the DraftKings app audience and blast out an alert to them like, hey, go to this show right now and you could win this, or you could have an opportunity for that. We've seen that work. We've seen it get great engagement on the DraftKings app where people will search for what we're trying to get them to search for. And we have seen some audience spike come to us when we do that. So that, there is only opportunity cost in doing that. You don't have to write a check to do something like that. That's the best kind of promotion. You can do it like that.
I want to ask you mentioned how, Nick, you focus on the content first and foremost. Prioritization of audio versus video. They're obviously both important, but when, you talked about when you talk to Mitch and Andrew and, hey, the audience is up, obviously some of that's going to come in audio, some of that's going to come in video. How do you look at that when it comes to the two?
I try and slam both of them. Try and be great at all of it. You Better You Bet's in an interesting position. And it's a great position. You're going to consume us in podcast form. We're live every day on 1 million radio stations nationwide. You can watch us on YouTube and Twitch. We have the partnership now with NBC Sports. The final hour is on Peacock. So I kind of have to every day when I put the show together. Okay, we're producing a show for radio. We're also producing a show for an overnight audience, and we're producing a show for video. Honestly, it's freaking exhilarating, dude. Because in the moments, and I've done TV and radio both for a long time, we're kind of producing in the moments. Like, okay, this graphic's wrong here, but also the sound that we're coming back from break with, the bed's got to be here and it's got to be mixed properly. So I'm cognizant of all of it, and I get paid to make sure that it's all good every day, that all of it's good. And it's very important to me that all of it's good, because if it's not all good, we're going to lose audience. Because we have people that listen to the show the next day, we have people that listen on the radio, and we have people that specifically tune in on video. And that's what, when I wake up in the morning and I get paid, it's to serve video, it's to serve live radio, and it's to serve podcast. So it's all of it.
You talked about scale is obviously important there. How about for you when it comes to prioritization of podcasts versus fast channel versus YouTube? Where does it start? What's the first thing you're looking at?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I would tell you for DraftKings, audio is the more mature, established world. You know, like many of the programs that we do business with started as podcast relationships that we had or radio relationships that we had. And so the audience is more mature there. The revenue is more mature there. You're starting at a different level. Having a fast channel is newer. And so that is still in build mode. It is a tricky balance. You know, the good news for us, again, is that many of the programs we work with, they are very grounded in audio and being a good listen. And the battle that we have is to make sure that, you know, it does not become podcast on TV. You know, that you want to introduce a certain standard of video, of graphic, of acknowledging that video and that graphic, while at the same time not leaving the audio audience behind and just laying out for long stretches of video only that will make no sense if somebody's listening to the podcast the next day. So as much as like video is probably perceived as sexier, the audio is really important and it cannot be left behind.
One of the things that's tricky about betting, if you give a sports opinion on the Giants will win 3 games next year, I may be pissed because the Giants have been so bad.
We're going to win money though, man. That's a winning bet.
But if I lose, now I can blame the host,
Yep.
right? So how do you manage against the dangers? Because we're talking about somebody could take your information, think, oh my God, that opinion is so good. I was going to spend $100. Nope, I'm going 10,000 on this. Uh-oh, I lost, and I'm blaming Nick Kostos.
Yep.
So how do you manage against that?
I'm really transparent. Here's the uncomfortable truth with sports betting content. You're all lovely people. If I won all my bets, do you think I'd be sitting here right now on this panel? I got up at 3:30 this morning to fly here from the East Coast. I'd be on my yacht right now. No way I'd be here. So anyone that's doing sports bet, it's not that they can't win. It's just that if they won all the time, they wouldn't be doing content. They'd be anonymous. They'd be really, really, really wealthy. So you just be transparent and you tell the audience, look, I really like this bet and here's why I like it. But it doesn't have to go this way.
Right.
And I'm really, really careful to say that all the time. You know, for example, I loved Duke. Since Thanksgiving, I love Duke.
2 minutes left. You look pretty smart.
I mean, to be fair, like I had they're up 14 in the second half, right? So on my show last week, I'm saying, look, everybody, like I love Duke. Also, I loved the Kansas City Chiefs. And look what happened. So yeah, like I speak well, right? I'm going to make a really compelling case. It does not mean I have to be right. It can go sideways. The ball bounces a funny way. Ref makes a bad call. Someone gets hurt. So at the end of the day, like you like something I'm saying, make sure you really like it before you place that bet. And the other thing would be obviously, and we say it on every single show, please gamble responsibly. So what day is today?
Sunday.
Okay. So yesterday, do a show nationally, You Better You Bets Countdown to Tip-Off, right? Set for the Final Four. And at the end of the show, we're giving out a lot of bets. And it's really important to say in that moment, like, hey, everybody, this is so exciting. We all love sports. This is a great day. Like, we're all excited to bet. What you need to do is assume what happens if I lose every single bet? Like, they all lose. When your head hits the pillow at night, are you going to be able to sleep? So Duke lost, and I didn't get to sleep anyways. I had to get up to see all of you lovely people. But I was able to sleep for like 3 hours last night because I gambled responsibly. So you tell the truth.
You have to handle it from a management side, making sure your talent understand what he was just talking about. How do you go about that?
Yeah, I mean, Nick, I think hit the right points. You know, responsible gaming it has to be in the DNA of everything that you're producing. I think I would offer and challenge that if anybody watched DraftKings Network for any prolonged stretch, you would see persistent, consistent, regular, responsible gaming messaging across everything that we do. And that's talent talking about it. That's tickers and bottom lines showing it. That's promos running during breaks. That's end of show credits. That's throughout everything that we do. again, the audience that you're targeting affects how you do this, though. At a DraftKings network, again, as we said, the betting talk that we do there, it's pretty light touch. Again, we're not necessarily bringing on like a hardcore bet expert where it's like, oh man, I better run to the bank with this. At a VSiN, the challenge is very, very different because there you are representing some expertise in what you're doing. And there is the expectation your audience is probably going to listen and take notes, and maybe it's going to sway where they go with it. To me, the key there is transparency. Again, it's any group to me that is being serious about their, betting expertise and handicapping and things like that. There has to be a way to see the scoreboard of who's doing well, how well are they doing, what's winning, what's losing, and then it's all right there, right? Like there's no mystery to, if this particular host is like, wow, this person seems to be pretty good on golf. Like, okay, you can see it right there in the numbers. Like we're not making that up. That to me is the danger zone, is when you get a lack of transparency, but people put themselves up as experts. That to me, that's not a great place to be.
When you look, Len, over the last 5 years, biggest lessons you've learned since getting into this space? Could be some of the wins, could be some of the challenges you've experienced, future goals. What are some of the biggest takeaways from what you've experienced the last few years with DK?
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit. Again, to me, like big names definitely are like a part of the winning formula to make it work. Finding, again, creative ways using, like leveraging your on-channel platforms and the audiences that your company already is able to reach, that makes a big difference. Like that gets the awareness and the things that you're looking for. Nick is going to love hearing this. I think talent matters,
You twisted my arm.
There you go. So, as not just, again, when we come from a old school media world, we tend to think of content as, long form programs, a 1 hour show, a 3 hour call in this, a documentary, a thing like that. Content takes 1,000 different forms, and we can't get too obsessed with the 3 hour show. Content, for us, some of the most successful content that we make is, it might be a 2-minute placed, like marketing spot that is prepping people for the Super Bowl. And it uses our talent from DraftKings Network to do it. We have found things like that are incredibly effective, more effective than flash and dash and sexy numbers and cool graphics. Like having talent people connect to, like we've seen it in the data. It matters and it leads to better marketing.
What about for you, Nick? Lessons learned since you started the show? I mean, we've talked about content, we talked about marketing, but just things you've done that have worked, things you've done that haven't worked, and future goals.
Yeah, I think anyone wants to do successful sports betting content, you have to be authentic. The audience is going to sniff you out if you're trying to be someone you're not. And you'd have to be yourself. I think I approach everything through like such the content lens. I think we candidly, and if you guys just like, please feel free to say so. I think we've had a pretty good, like, not the case with everything in life, but I think we've had our finger on this basically from the start and how this has gone. I think a lot of what we've done has been pretty successful. Do I regret any of it? Probably not, honestly. I think some stuff works better than others. I don't know if there's anything where I could point to and say, like, this was a huge miss. I don't know if I would say that, but I think the biggest lesson is, and you kind of know it going in, but it's confirmed as time goes on, you have to be yourself. If you're not, and this just goes for all sports content or content in general. If you're someone and you're doing sports betting and you're not, and you don't know what you're talking about and you're trying to fake it, the audience is going to catch on. It's not going to work. So be yourself.
You look into your crystal ball when legalization came out massive from 2018 on, and then it started to slow down a little bit. And so obviously the more legalization, the more people bet, the better it is for everybody, right? But we can't always count on that. Like I think a year ago, everybody thought California was going to go legal and it didn't, right? But if there's one thing you've got your eye on as you look at the next couple of years, what's the one thing that you're curious about seeing break our way so this space continues to boom?
Yeah, I probably need to be careful to say this is me speaking for Len Mead, not for the company DraftKings. The prediction markets is a really interesting space. I don't have any inside knowledge of where this is all going, but you've probably seen in the news, the Kalshis of the world and sort of these exchange markets where you're not just necessarily dealing with sports, but you can be dealing with, weather or the Academy Awards or things like that. As a content maker, that's a really interesting space. Like that would really open up, content opportunities, I think, for us. Now, to be clear, like DraftKings Network, we are the tail on that dog, right? Like we're not leading the company to do things in that space, but if that space were to grow, that creates a lot of content avenues that we would, I think, have fun playing.
It's also been interesting. You look in recent years, how many times we've seen reports mentioned about insiders leaving networks to potentially one day work for a betting company. You go, well, that would make sense. They have all the information. That can definitely affect the lines, right? We've seen the explosion in betting networks between BetMGM, DraftKings, FanDuel on TV, Bally's got in there. So the space is still very, very new. I mean, we're talking about something that's less than 10 years old. And we will have time for questions in just a few, but I want to get from you, Nick, one final takeaway for folks in the room. If there's one thing why they should be considering making betting a bigger part of their mix if they work in media, why should that be?
Can I say one thing about the insider thing?
Yeah.
So this is really cool, right? Sometimes I will get information before it breaks publicly, which is not to be like, I'm so cool. I'm like the 1,000th person that gets it. I get it I'm not even the 50th person that gets it. So I will sometimes get stuff, quarterback shoulder injury. It'll break like 9 hours later. So just a lesson for everybody. Bettors will always, always have it first. Look at the betting market and you'll be able to know if a player is playing or not. Bettors will have it first.
So now give me one thing for folks in the room why betting should be a bigger part of their mix.
Yeah, I'll do like my REM paraphrase. Everybody bets. Look, and that doesn't mean someone's blunking $100K down on Yankees first five, right? This could be a $10, 5-team parlay on a Sunday, or betting UConn women today in the women's national championship game, or Houston first half tomorrow against Florida in the men's national championship game. Like everybody bets. Everybody bets. And that could be, again, experience, novice, or maybe someone's like, wow, like this looks like a lot of fun. I'd like to participate in this. So when you have this huge swath of people that all wants to do something, feels like a no-brainer for me for people to be involved.
Yeah, I'll just jump on top of that too. That to me, betting analysis this is just another wave of statistical analysis. It's another way to enjoy a game and to sort of have an angle on it. I don't know how many people here are in my age demographic where you remember watching a baseball game and a player would come to bat and you would see their batting average, home runs, RBIs. Mm-hmm. Then remember that? Like those were the 3 key numbers. What is it today? You still see those numbers, but now you might get their OBP. You might get their defensive rating. You might get their WAR. You might get all sorts of things. And betting statistics are just another way to approach things. It's what are the odds of this, the over under on what this player's total bases are going to be in a game. What is the money line is essentially just what's the win percentage for this team right now at this moment. To your point that everybody bets, I mean, this is mainstream now. This is not
and this is stuff sports fans talk about anyway. Who's going to win? Who's going to play well?
Well, and the interesting thing is he's talking about the home runs, batting average, RBI. I'm just thinking, how soon are we going to see a stat on the screen that says, it's a 3-to-1 odds that he gets a hit right here?
Great. Hopefully tomorrow. I think that would be awesome.
That seems to be where things are headed. The more interest, obviously, the more people are going to want that information during the event. We've got time for a question or two. If anybody's got one, put your hand up and we'll get you in here. Go ahead.
What do you want to do? What you want to talk? Okay. There's a million different ways to answer that. Are you in the industry right now? Yeah, I always say to people, to young people that say, how do I break into the industry? You have to know people. Are internships still a thing? They were like when I was.
A little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit.
The thing about sports and sports betting, and it all kind of dovetails together, right, is think about when games are played. Nights, weekends, holidays, right? So if you're young and you really want to make it in this industry, like my 20s, I didn't have a social life really, because I'm working on Thanksgiving and I'm taking the 3 a.m. train home on a Thursday because the Mavericks and the Suns went to overtime, which happens a lot. So you have to be willing to really sacrifice, because that's what sports is. My suggestion would be try to get a job at a local, TV station doing sports, local radio station, meet as many people as possible. We can get into the formatics of hosting a show and putting a show together, but unless you know people, you're never going to get an opportunity.
I'd say too, and I assume you're speaking specifically about like the betting side of sports content. Again, like the world is so different today, than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Anybody has the ability to create their own body of work. Like you don't need to get a job and then start laying tape, like you can create a podcast. You can create things on YouTube. You can create a newsletter. You can do all of those things and you don't need anybody to hire you, sign you, promote it. Now you're aiming for all those things and you want to build off of it. But the key is reps and building a body of work. And if you're able even to create like a modest following with what you do there, that's really helpful. Like that sort of, it demonstrates your authenticity. It also demonstrates that you're serious about it, that it's not hey, I woke up one day and decided I want to do sports betting content. That's like an immediate turnoff when you get that, where it's like, okay, sure, sports betting's hot, so now you want to be in sports betting, like that. But if you demonstrate that you've put the time in, and again, you have a body of work, that makes a big difference.
We got time for one more question. There we go.
How can smaller sports or niche leagues capitalize on the betting boom in increasing their audience?
Well, can I ask, like, what sport are you referring to?
Rugby or rugby league, for example?
Len could speak from the business side. I'll just speak from the content perspective. In America, like, it's not a big thing. Like, I would never do it on my show because there's no audience for it, which doesn't mean that it's not like a huge market that's potentially able to be exploited. But like, I can't do something on my show that the audience is not interested in, which again, I do not mean as an insult. It's just not there yet in the United States.
Yeah. It's funny. I remember where there used to be this sort of chicken and egg battle about like ESPN and hockey. I remember this from back in the day where it's like, is hockey popular because it's on ESPN, or does ESPN decide to carry it because it's popular? And like, there's that, like, they're both right to a degree, but it's not quite so simple. And somebody like Nick and a network like DraftKings Network probably is not super likely to talk about rugby because it's today not a very heavily bet, super popular sport here. If we were to start talking about it, yeah, that would probably help. And so if the question is like, well, how do I get you guys to talk about it more? Like sometimes that's a marketing partnership, that there's like other avenues where you can create incentives and a partnership. And then that leads to other things down the road.
But like, think about like what it took we do Formula One on the show sometimes. Literally because like, I love the Netflix show Drive to Survive. Like I never watched Formula One until that show. Like that's what it took.
Yeah, they didn't wait for a broadcaster to make them popular. They kind of took it into their own hands, invested in it.
Yeah.
And then America fell in love with it.
Let me tell you, man.
Yeah.
Great show.
Amazing.
Great show.
Guys, our time is up. I'm Jason Barrett of Barrett Media. Give it up for Len Mead of DraftKings Network, Nick Kostos of the BetMGM Network. They'll be around. Make sure you say hello.